I guess we'll just start off with Hans. Yesterday we talked about kind of an overview of what's happening in the appraisal world. So if you want to start from there, and we'll get Beth and Doug to jump in when necessary too.
Sounds good. And everyone can hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So currently with the changes with the COVID-19 emergency issuance, the lender is providing us with the appraisal assignment type, whether it's a desktop, an exterior, or an interior. We make a judgment after we receive that assignment to determine the appraisal scope of work, if it's sufficient to report a credible result. So in our appraisals, we have to determine whether or not whatever assignment we've been given, that we can get enough information to report something that's credible. We're going to perform the appraisal using the tools and the information that's available, an exterior viewing likely, MLS data, broker or an owner interview, public records, prior MLS photos and information, pictures by an owner or an agent, FaceTime, Skype, Zoom, those sorts of sources that we can actually communicate maybe one-on-one in that format. We're going to then document the sources, retain the pictures, emails such as a list of improvements, a history of changes or things that contribute to value, the good stuff. We also need to know what is deferred maintenance or just plain odd. Let's say the bedrooms are attached through only one access. So you've got 3 bedrooms, but you've got to go through 2 to get to the other. Those are things we're going to be interviewing or we'd like to see in some sort of evidence. Email is probably the best way to document some of those details that I just went over. Whether it's, there could be a Dropbox, as Beth mentioned yesterday. There's ways that we can talk about gaining some of this information. And if appraisers and owners are willing to risk interiors, the owners need to be prepared for being out of the house, maybe for several hours. Some appraisers may decide that you need to be out of the house for several hours before they go in. Doors open, crawl hatches, everything that needs to be viewed would have to be open so there's less touching. Lights on, they may choose to use masks, gloves, have blinds open, etc. before we even get there. But that's just an idea of what happens if an interior is the only option. And time is needed to adapt, gather, and document all the things that we need. So there is going to be some time involved both on the agents, owners, and the appraisers that aren't part of our normal standard. We're going to redefine the scope of work that we're doing to provide that credible report. And we have to really go through details of what we did do and what we didn't do. So in real estate, my brain always goes location, location, location. Right now in my job, all I can think of is disclose, disclose, disclose. So those are the things that we're having to kind of give you an overview on. And to give you an idea also with that lender that's providing us with the assignment, each lender is using guidance from Fannie Mae, Freddie, Rural Development, MISHDA, VA, or FHA. They're going to decide what the appraisal type is. And again, then we're going to decide whether or not we can perform that appraisal with the scope of work and the data that we have. So that kind of gives us, at least gives you a little insight. We're definitely in a new market, so we also have to look to see beyond just the fact that we've got a subject property, we've got comparable data, and then we go through our scope of work. We're now having to look to see what the supply looks like, the demand looks like, days on the market. There's a lot more detail that we're going to have to interpret as we go forward. Right now, we're just kind of in a hold pattern, so we don't know what the results of this change in market are. But those are things that in the days going forward, we're going to have to be paying close attention to. So how about if I leave it at there and we can go on to the next questions or such.
Great, thanks, Hans. Beth, you had provided some information. Hans was kind of going through what each individual lender is going to request of you as an appraiser. Can you kind of talk about some of the information that you provided?
Sure.
I think Amanda's going to try and get it up on the screen so everybody can see, but if you want to just start talking about it, that would be great.
Sounds good. And to clarify, I think I gave Hans the link for this, so that's why it shows up as Beth Graham under his square. I think people were confused about that. Anyways, so yeah, so when we get a request over from a lender, they're going to need either, a lot of them right now are letting us choose if we want to go inside or just do a drive-by exterior type appraisal. So, but it all depends on what the buyer is doing, what their credit score is. If it's a cash out refinance, those are still going to require interior appraisals. So, because there's more risk there, obviously. So some of those might have to wait, you know, several weeks for this to get over, or just find the right appraiser to go in, and use precautions when we do go in with gloves and masks. And, you know, it's kind of, I left a house this morning and I'm sure they like sprayed it down with Lysol as soon as I left. So it was very awkward. But those are the things. If it's a cash out refi, it's going to have to be an interior. But most of the lenders now, it kind of took them a week or so to get on board with this, but they're allowing us to do exteriors. And we like to still go measure the house and do all that. Since we have been deemed to be essential, we can be on the road. So still show up, measure the house. Like Hans said, do a FaceTime, but it all depends on the loan type that the borrower is getting. So, but most of them are pretty flexible now that it can be a drive-by.
Great, thanks, Beth. Doug, yesterday we talked about disclosure and due diligence and stuff like that. Can you kind of describe to everybody what that's going to look like now?
Right, and Hans kind of talked about that somewhat about disclose. I think we're at a point here where, you know, we have to take it upon ourselves to do our due diligence, whether it be in interior, which I think a lot of guys, and the three of us talked yesterday about if we're not comfortable with it, or if there are appraisers out there who aren't comfortable with it, what's the process look like on that end? And like every assignment that's sent to us, we have that right to turn it down. And just because someone gives it to you, that's a business decision you have to make at this point as to, you know, if you want to keep you know, just exterior, you can turn those down. But where we're talking about disclosing is, you know, within your report for us appraisers, I think, and I think the two of you guys would agree, list everything you did. It's not anything different than what we do on a daily basis, but you have to disclose the way you came about coming into this information. And like Hans had said, whether it's Skype or a Zoom meeting with them or interior photos, I'd suggest at this point that realtors be also aware that there might be a lot of appraisers calling them to verify information, whether it be from recent transactions or something maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Beth, I just somebody sent me your appraisal report from 2 years ago because they had it on file. Homeowners I've gotten 3 or 4 of those where we have an old appraisal. Would you like to see it? Yes, I'd like to see it. It gives me an idea of what the house is like from another an appraiser. But Megan, I think your question about disclosure, we have to be taking, you know, we have to take into account where our, you know, what we've done to arrive at our value, or not even our value of how we've just gotten all the information we can. Hans touched on it really well in the beginning. You know, with all these different options, we have technologies at our fingertips, and we have so many sources and ways of gathering this information that I think it's not going to be that difficult moving forward. We just need everybody to be on the same page and everybody helping each other.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was on the state board when during the crash, and I think appraisers right now, we're trying to write bulletproof appraisals. So we're explaining that there's a pandemic in our appraisals. We're really analyzing the market to see where it's going. We're looking at days on market, because obviously that's going to go up because agents can't show houses. I know they're still selling houses, but it's all going to take longer. So we have to make sure our reports are credible to the intended user that's reading them. So we're writing reports. It's going to take us longer because we're trying to make sure that they're totally bulletproof in case, you know, a couple years down the road and something happens. We want to make sure that we totally explained it and there's no mishaps later on.
You're right, Beth, and you know, the three of us talked yesterday, and I think within my report, a typical report, I maybe go over how I arrived at and got this information multiple times within the report, and you know that it's going to be something that, like Beth said, it's going to maybe take us a little bit longer to finish an appraisal. A lot of it's lag time from the homeowner getting us pictures or, you know, in contact with them. I have one that I'm sitting on that's, you know, the 24 hours and I haven't received any information back. So, you know, that's going to happen too. And I think that we just have to, as appraisers, be very careful as to the way we report, and also reaching out to our realtors, and they're very good. You realtors are awesome at getting us information, and including a lot of pictures in your reports. I know some realtors don't put everything in there. In terms of pictures, we might have to reach out to you. Hans, you said you had someone with 80 pictures the other day that sent them to you.
Yep, we did.
That's a lot of pictures, but we can use everything we can get.
I think it's going to get more specific. I sat through a webinar that was presented a couple days ago, and I can read through, if you want me to, a few of the items that they said we should expect to be asking people. And we might, as this is changing, as you guys are changing as agents, brokers, as to how you're doing business, we're having to kind of relearn, retool our brains for how we're going to do this too. So there's going to be a learning curve, I think, for all of us. We're adjusting as quick as we can.
Hey, Hans, before you
yes.
read that list, I do have a question that I think fits in really well here that came through the chat.
You bet.
And that is it helpful if agents send you the comparables they've used to list the house?
That's always something that can happen even when we were doing appraisals 2 months ago. It may not change what we're looking at, because our job is to determine what the criteria is for a comparable. We're always glad to have someone share with us the information that they've used. Same with a homeowner that's doing a refinance. They might tell us about a for sale by owner, information they may want us to know. So that is fine. Don't be offended if they're not the comparables that meet our criteria for selecting comps. Sometimes doing a CMA is completely different than doing an appraisal. So we're going to actually have the same MLS data you guys have, unless there's something that you know about specifically that's transacted that's not in the MLS, or maybe you want to tell us something more about a few of the comparables that you saw. And if you want to send an email with this, the house next door just sold for $30,000 less than this house. I was in it. The place was a dump, and here's why. Something like that, that's fine. We can take that data and discern it as well. Does that help?
Yes, I think that answered the question. So the one thing that you guys also mentioned is time. Do you think that the process that you have to go through now is going to take more time? Or do you think that the appraisals are still going to be coming back as in the same time frame that they were prior to the pandemic?
I feel more time myself right now until the learning curve hits. It's sort of just like having to list a house right now may take a little more time trying to figure out what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. If you want to list a house today, and I don't know this, so I may be speaking too far ahead, but I would assume because I am not supposed to be out working as an agent, I've got to figure out other ways to gather the data and then build that new listing. And that's sort of the same way with the appraisal right now. So for me, I'm taking longer because I'm working through it. We have a whole new list. It was 2 or 3 pages from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that gave us new certifications that we have to make sure we're meeting. So our reports are built in with certifications that things we've done and haven't done, things that we're supposed to do as part of the appraisal process. That's changed. So the certifications have changed. So we're having to work through those as well. So that's my two cents on it.
Beth or Doug, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think when you're relying on somebody else's data, it's like if you're doing a review, it always takes longer because you're always like second guessing or you're double verifying everything. So it takes a little bit longer. I always try to put my purchases on top though. So,
Yeah.
you know, our timing's pretty fast on purchases where with the refis, you know, the purchases come first. So we're trying to weed through those first and try not to have any delays.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. And at the same time, I had scheduled and came up with a format email-wise to, you know, what I send the people to schedule at least my walkabout about their house. And within 10 minutes, the guy had sent back all his pictures and any information that he had. So in some cases, it might be similar or the same amount of time, depending on where we're appraising and what kind of house we're appraising. A little bit more difficult ones might take more time because we have, you know, it's more things to look over. It's like the one I was doing earlier had a very unique situation, and that's going to take a lot more checking and verifying. Not that we don't on every one of them, but it also took her 24 hours to get me everything back. So like you guys said, sometimes it's just a lag time of, you know, how fast we're getting the information and how fast we're able to verify and double check it.
You know, when I'm filling out the data that I do normally going through a house, I kind of sometimes feel like a robot. I'm used to this after many years, as I know you two are. And so the things that my eye catches when I go through a house, I think is going to be important for those that we have access to that can walk through with us. I can get pictures from an owner or from an agent. And if there's somebody on site, if it's an occupied house or there's access to being on site on the inside or somebody that's occupying it, they can actually take me on some sort of tour. That would help me fill out those forms faster to then go back and be able to kind of streamline what I'm doing. And that's my thought on that, at least.
Yeah.
Hans, before I interrupted you with the question, there was a list that you were going to read to us.
These were a few ideas. Now these are going to be related a little bit to people that are doing desktops where they're not leaving their desk at all. And so we are with a desktop appraisal, we don't actually have to leave the office to do that. With a drive-by, a 2055 exterior, that's the form type we're using. Those we're going to be out in the field taking the exterior photos from the road. We may choose to go on the property if we don't think the assessor sketches or information we're getting is sufficient. We may verify things in person, and we may just decide to walk around a property. But those are things that the scope of, again, the scope of what we have to do for each one will be a little different, and we'll kind of learn that through. But homeowner photos, a survey of what possibly we're going to ask for is to provide some exterior photos if we're not there. So if we are there, we'll get the front photo. Maybe we're not going to go in the backyard, so we might ask for a rear photo. We might ask for side angle photos of houses. We'll take, if we're doing a drive-by, the street scene up and down the street. We may ask the owner to do that for us. If there's anything on the property that we can't access, a pole barn, a pond, things that may be locked, things that we don't actually want to go into, or somebody may be doing work in one of those buildings, we may ask for interior photos of those. When we get into the property, we have very specific guidelines in our appraisals to provide bedroom, bathroom, living room, dining room, kitchen, photos of sorts. We'll have a specific list requesting that a photo be sent, and it might be a best to have that photo as wide as you can through the room. And then we may actually have to have a close-up of some special feature if it's a custom bookcase or something of that sort. We'll ask questions about if we're on site but not actually in the yard. We might ask about public sewer, public water. Is the well something that's still functional at a house? Has it been hooked up to city sewer? A lot of those things we can get, but we may ask questions such as that. And any changes to those systems. There's going to be floors and basements, rooms that we can see the data and the assessor records that might just say a rec room, but actually there's more rooms finished. So we'll want photos of those. Mechanicals, sump pumps, things of that sort we may ask for. Like I said, I think a lot of that can be done through a FaceTime or Skype, but if we need those photos, as Doug said earlier, 80 photos is a lot to look through. And those are more for selecting in that particular agents that I got 80 photos on, for them to select what photos look best in the MLS. I just happen to get them all in that case. You want to describe the features of the house. So we might ask for an owner to send us an email, and that's probably the best way to do it. Give me a list of things that are going to be specific to the value, what kind of flooring we have, features in the garage, is it finished, etc. So those are things that I may walk through on or may ask for photos of. There's also going to be what kind of remodeling. Our reports are designed to work through a Fannie and Freddie program that codes things like the condition. We don't have just it's good condition or pretty good. We actually have condition codes. So in those codes, there's criteria as to how much improvements have been done in the last 15 years. Maybe it'll be 1 to 5 years of improvements, etc. We'll be able to see some of those things while we're looking through photos and looking at maybe a video, but we actually may ask for those things in an email. We can't use for Freddie and Fannie what they called extraordinary assumptions. So we have to feel confident in what data we're getting and the sources of the data to make sure that we're not saying, well, we believe this is likely true. We have to somehow have evidence that we're expecting this is true, and not just make an assumption that it's true. And that seems kind of wishy-washy there, but that's sort of what they've set up. It gives you an idea of what, but I think really the best thing to have is a detailed list, maybe that we even send somebody out. And I think Beth had one that was prepared by another appraiser that she saw and she thought it was pretty good. And you can go on to that, Beth, if you want to share anything from your insight there.
Yeah, Jessie Schmidt, one of our appraisers here, she produced a beautiful, like 3-page questionnaire to send to your to the homeowner so they can fill it out, and it's pretty much our page 1 of our appraisal. So I think I'm going to recreate it, and but it's very helpful. And so if you've ever seen a page 1 of an appraisal, or we could send you one, that's all the information we need. Or I've shared before my improvement sheet, and we need that, you know, when were all the updates done, what type of countertops, all that information. So, and I'd like to just stress too, I know you can't take photos right now, but we need good photos of the front and the back, and the listings well written that talk about all the great features of the house. Not just say there's this pole barn, take a picture of the pole barn, take a picture of the inside of the pole barn, the pool, the view of the pond, the back of the house. Rarely is there a picture of the back of the house. So sometimes we have to guess at those items or look at past listings to try to figure out what's going on with the house. So I'm not sure how many photos you can have in a listing, but it seems like I've seen 100 and some. So take lots of photos so we can write a good report.
So Beth, there are unlimited photos for Flex MLS. And I think that this is a good thing to keep in mind when the market goes back to normal and listing agents can go back into a home, to keep in mind the things that you're looking for in appraisals, because it just helps you use the MLS data, and it helps everything go more smoothly if the required information that you're looking for is already in the MLS. And I know that photos have been an issue, that agents don't want to show the bad features of a home in the syndication. And within the next few weeks, we are going to have a feature updated in Flex MLS that allows you to keep photos private. So that would be something that just the users of the MLS could see. And I think that that will be a very helpful situation for the appraisers if there are certain photos that you guys are always in need of. One of the other things we talked about yesterday that we talked about on Monday with agents is having the listing agent available when the appraisal or appraiser's going to the property, even if it's just on the outside, because you guys are going to be asking them so many more questions, and depending on the agents and the sellers so much more than before. And we talked about, would it be advantageous for the appraisers to have a Zoom or FaceTime meeting with the sellers so that they could be your eyes inside the home and zoom in on some specifics that Hans was talking about? Beth, what do you think about that?
No, I think that would be great. I always appreciate when the seller's there or a listing agent. Not if they talk too much and they distract you, but it's, it's the best thing. They know everything about their house. They're going to tell you what they did, what they didn't do. And I know some agents don't like that, but that's what we need. So I think FaceTime with a seller, or even just a phone call, is very helpful.
Unless anybody has anything they want to add on to that, I do have a couple questions. Doug or Hans, did you want to add anything on to what Beth said?
I agree with her.
Yeah, me too. As much information as possible in any way we can get it is what we're looking for right now. That was not my dog either.
That was Amanda's dog.
There we go.
I would like to say too, I've talked to so many agents in the last week and a half, and it's been very helpful. Unfortunately, you're a captive audience, but everybody calls, and when I ask questions about the condition or sales concessions or whatever, so just return that appraiser's phone call. It just helps us write a better report, and it's usually to your advantage if we have all the good information. So I appreciate the people that have returned my phone calls and helped me out.
So one of the questions that came in is, what do you guys see happening with values?
We don't know yet. Unfortunately, a lot of our strong values are from last spring. So if we don't have a lot of sales, coming up, or it's going to be a couple months away, we're just doing a lot of analysis right now, because we did have a slower fall market, which is normal. slower fall winter market, and then because of the GM strike and whatnot. But now we're just trying to, analyze. We might have to go back further for comps because we're going to have maybe a month or so with very few sales to deal with. So there's just, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree
Yeah.
with you, Beth.
And I do too. I think that up to this point, I haven't seen the impact. I can't report any impact other than I'm seeing when I fill out some of my market statistics forms, that you can see all of a sudden there's an increase in supply and days on the market. And that's likely because we're not getting, at least in the last week or two, absorption like we would normally during a nice weather spring market. We're just in a holding place.
Mhm.
So I think the overall consensus with all of the panelists that we've had this week is that agents are going to have to really do a good job of talking to their buyers and sellers about how involved they're going to have to be in this process, where they didn't necessarily have to be as involved in the process before. And it's still a process where they need you as an agent, whether they can see you face to face or not. But if you can educate your buyers and sellers on what's happening next, I think that keeps you in the middle of the transaction. I don't see that we have any more questions. Do any of the panelists have anything further that they want to add?
I had a couple things come up, Megan, actually.
Okay, go ahead.
The first is actually something that came through on our Facebook Live feed, and that is who determines a drive-by appraisal?
The lender does.
The lender. Yep.
And yeah, and it's based on the borrower's ability and what the borrower is going to do. Like I said, if it's a cash out refinance, and that's the scary thing right now is people are doing cash out refinances to cash out their house and live on it. So that's going to require a full appraisal because there's so much risk. So there's less risk in a borrower buying a house that has money to put down. So then you can have an exterior appraisal.
And I would recommend that the realtors, if they're working with a lender, have them send the graphics breakdown of what sort of appraisals are going to be ordered based on loan to values, other eligibility, et cetera, because they are a little different for each property. Some of those lenders, they've really opened up a wide opportunity for us to be able to do the drive-by or the exterior only appraisals or the desktops, but there is criteria before those can be decided. And then it's up to that appraiser to find out whether or not that's actually sufficient enough for them to complete it. If there is a house on 100 acres that's a modern style home that's doesn't have a lot of data available, that's going to be complicated to say, I might finish that up as a desktop or a drive-by. You're going to find a lot of people. I just had one last week. I was assigned an appraisal, and this was a refinance. It wasn't a purchase. But I was assigned an appraisal of a home that appeared to be a log home, but they couldn't really tell the construction. The owners kind of were reporting it was a mix of both. That appraiser said to the lender, I'm not confident in this. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to pass on this appraisal. It happened to be that it was an appraisal from my prior records from a few years ago. So when they called me, I was able to look up that appraisal and say, yep, I'm confident that I could do that. I have enough data from being there prior.
Thank you. And one last question here. Can you discuss sales concessions with us? Not just now, but in general. How do you treat them? What can we do better?
I don't know what you could do better. Just disclose the sales concessions when a property closes. And if there's anything, like I had to call on sales concessions last week that were close to $14,000. So that's not normal. And the agent had told me that they bumped up the sale price because the buyer needed cash to close, or sales concessions to make the deal go. So if it's something out of bounds like that, typically an appraiser is going to call you and say, you know, why is this so out of whack? But typically, you know, in my appraisals, I subtract the sales concessions from the sale price. And so in that instance, that was $14,000 off the top, but they had raised the price of the house too to cover all that. So I really don't know your question.
Well, and I was going to say, what I can sense is maybe the question is that when the concessions are added on, I look to see if it's like you say, I almost call it a tack on. Did we tack it onto the price to make that deal work for that individual? So it's not for the whole market. Not everybody in that market's going to need that closing cost assistance to get into that house. But if you have one buyer that needs it and you're adding it on to a price that's already been set, which usually most realtors are going to want to get the highest price possible for their client. So now we're adding on higher. And I'm going to look through data. I'm going to look through comparables that may not indicate that high. And it's going to be real evident that that was just tacked on to make that individual deal work. In other cases, it may just be, hey, this is our first offer. It's a good one. The house was listed for 100. They're asking for 5,000 in closing costs. The comps all set around 100. That's great. I would think though, realtors and anyone doing brokers doing a CMA, we have to deal with what they call cash equivalency. So when somebody pays $100,000 for a house, but the seller pays $5,000 in closing cost and other additional things, that house really sold for $95,000. And that's how it's going to show on our report. We're going to show in an appraisal that it sold for 100 less 5,000 to now make it cash equivalent. So that means that it's not like a 6% realtor fee in the market where every house that's pretty much listed on MLS is paying around 6%. Every house in the market isn't paying, the seller is not going to pay closing costs.
That's necessarily true. We're not going to talk about that.
No, okay.
That's to choose and negotiate their own fees.
That's right.
So Hans was just using a theoretical number to come up with a discussion point.
There we
Not
go.
a broker, he's good.
Well,
Not a practicing. But it's non-standard. I mean, it is, there's some markets, you know, if we got to a point where in a market, everyone paid 3% in closing costs, then that would just be part of that transaction. If everyone in a market paid a realtor fee or, you know, a brokerage fee, that's kind of normal in a market. So we have to look to see how that is. That's how that's usually dealt with. So it does have an impact on those comparables. We have to take that off.
Alrighty, thank you so much. Thank you, Beth Graham, Doug Petroff, and Hans Schwab for participating today on our appraisal roundtable. Quick reminder, tomorrow we have digital paperwork as our roundtable, so you can learn the how-tos of doing business from your home. So please join us at noon tomorrow. Same thing next week. We've got some topics for next week at noon, so look forward to that schedule. I want to thank everybody for attending and look out for the recording later on. Have a great afternoon, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thank you.